Hello there, Mr. K here, the mediocre painter, and I've been painting minis for some 30 odd years, and I'm doing YouTube videos to help you get into the wargaming hobby because I've made the mistakes so you don't have to. Now, today I'm going to talk about cheap miniatures in terms of finding cheap miniatures for you to actually practice on when you're a beginner, so you don't basically ruin miniatures you actually want to play with. Now, the reason why I'm doing this video is actually I was looking at doing this myself, and then I remembered that I had picked up a miniature game a long time ago now, and I've been meaning to maybe paint the miniatures one day, and that actually those miniatures aren't the best quality and they'll be ideal to paint with just from a practicing perspective. And that game was this. It's Magic the Gathering, Arena of the Planeswalkers board game. And this thing is basically a repackaged version of, I think, Heroescape, which was an MB game back in the late 90s, early 2000s. And it's actually got a bit of a cult following. It was actually a pretty good game. And one of the cool things about Heroescape was they had these interlocking tiles that enabled you to sort of build this really amazing sort of 3D landscapes that you would actually play in, and different tiles would mean different arenas, so like, desert or forest and so on, which would give bonuses to the miniatures that you were using. And also the miniatures themselves were pre-painted. They were reasonably well pre-painted. There were sort of basic rules so you could pick it up if you were young, and more advanced rules and so on. It hasn't had anything added to it since 2010, I think, and at some point Hasbro acquired MB Games, and then also they own Wizards of the Coast, which has the Magic of the Gathering property, and they try to basically kit bash almost these two things together in a cynical ploy to try and sell more units. And believe me, this is a cynical ploy. And there's actually a really good review of it actually out there. I recommend you actually have a look. I'll put a link to it up here. Really talks about just how cynical it actually is. So this box retails for about £30, and there's some 30 odd miniatures actually inside it, I think. And they come in these kind of trays with the miniatures basically sort of locked inside them. And so let's just have a quick count here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Yeah, something like 30 odd miniatures. And the miniatures are not the best quality. They're a hard plastic, at least. They're not like a soft plastic that you get in the Dungeons and Dragons game from Fantasy Flight. So they're actually a bit better quality from that perspective. The sculpts aren't too bad, to be perfectly honest. They're a bit wibbly wobbly bases wise, and there's mould lines everywhere and all that kind of stuff. So is it worth £30? No, absolutely not. It's not worth 30 quid. And even when I bought this a few years ago, it was discounted, I bought it in the US, I think it was discounted to 20 or so on. And there's actually a couple of expansions for it as well. This hasn't actually now been discontinued. And because basically people who play Magic the Gathering were like, oh, this isn't really very good, and they didn't really buy it. But Hasbro produced loads of them, absolutely loads of them, and they couldn't shift them. And so as a consequence of which, this is now available online for not £20 or £15 or £10 or even £9. You can actually get this on Amazon right now for £8.50, £8.49 in fact. And so if you have Amazon Prime, you can get it delivered to your door in a couple of days for £8.50 for all of these miniatures. If you're just looking for something to practice on, this really is not a bad place to start. Now, there's a series of miniatures here, the character miniatures, which are the Planeswalkers basically, and they're like characters in the Magic the Gathering realm. And they have different types of magic. You've got black, green, white, that kind of thing. And so black magic's kind of death, red is like fire, you get the idea. So these miniatures come pre-painted. They are not the best in terms of like pre-painted miniatures you're ever likely to see, to be perfectly honest. I mean, they're not super terrible or anything, but yeah, you're going to want to strip these if you ever want to actually repaint them. And if you are going to strip them, they are enamel. So you're probably going to need to use acetone in order to get the stuff off. You can try with isopropyl alcohol, but you'll be scrubbing forever. If you use meth, which is my personal favourite, it just won't take it off at all. So basically, if you do decide to strip them, use a little bit of acetone on a toothbrush and just scrub it, and you'll find you'll get most of it off, as evidenced here, where I've actually managed to be able to get most of the stuff off of Chandra, who's the red magic, and I quite like Chandra, so that's the reason why I did that. So how well do these things actually, paint up? So the answer is not too bad. So I've done a few here just to basically give you an example or so. And so here we've got a green sort of tree man. And we've got a rocks, which is basically a warrior rhino. And I actually did this sort of firehound, if it will actually come out of the box as well. I was actually practicing some blending using this firehound. So they don't paint up too bad. Now the only thing is, there's a lot of these clear plastic miniatures in here. And this clear plastic stuff is not very porous. And so as a consequence of which, when you come to paint it, the paint doesn't stick quite as well as it does to like a Games Workshop miniature, right? And if you're expecting these to be anything like Games Workshop miniatures, you're going to be very disappointed because they're miles away from that kind of quality. But they are useful to basically practice out some new colour schemes perhaps, or different techniques like blending and things like that. And you don't really have to worry about, whether you're actually ruining anything, because, you only spent £8.50 and you got yourself 30 or 40 miniatures to play with. The game itself isn't really much cop, to be perfectly honest, though I hear that the people who really like Escape have basically, included these minis into their actual rule set that they're keeping alive right now, which is pretty cool. So, if you wanted to get into that game, you would actually be able to do it with this miniature set. So, one of the things, about these clear plastic minis that you will find is that, the paint will chip off pretty easy because it doesn't completely properly bond. The more solid plastic ones, like, our Tree Man, for example, as long as you give them a good scrubbing, before you start, and with soap and water to make sure all the release agent or whatever is on here is off, that actually bonds quite well to it. It's not too bad. But you'll probably find that there's a need, if you actually do like what you've done when you finish painting these things up, and you never know, you might do, then, you probably want to cover them in a matte varnish or whatever just to protect them, which you should do on all your minis eventually anyway. But these are definitely more vulnerable to chipping than a regular mini because of that lack of porosity. So anyway, that's it. If you're looking for a cheap set of minis, £8.50, get you a bunch of minis for you to practice on to your heart's content. You're probably not going to have much of a vested emotional interaction with these miniatures, which is a good thing when you're learning. It's not a good idea really to actually paint miniatures you actually really care about when you're just beginning, because if you do ruin them, you get really upset and it might actually put you off the hobby. So anyway, I hope you found that useful, and if you did, then please subscribe. I will be doing more. I'll see you next time. Bye bye.